Israeli forces are still hitting hospitals, killing the wounded as well as medical staff. The same happens at UN schools like Anwar's school that was just blown up, and refugee camps across Gaza where large numbers of internally displaced Palestinians have taken shelter. Hell on earth, graveyard for children, catastrophic and similar agonizing words are used by international humanitarian organizations to describe the situation in Gaza. Meanwhile, people around the world are crying out loud, asking for an end to the Israeli genocide, while blaming the United States for the plight of Palestinians. Welcome to the Spotlight. I'm your host, Behruz Najafi, and these are our guests in this episode. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector in Iraq, is joining us out of Bethlehem, New York. Also with us is Vanessa Beeley, independent journalist out of Damascus. Good to see you both. Welcome to the show. Now, Scott, beginning with you, you might know 80% of the Gaza population has been displaced based on official reports, and they're urgently in need of food and water just to survive. So aid is not reaching them properly with all the restrictions, imposed by the Israeli regime. Who should pay the price of this collective punishment?
Well, Israel should pay the price, and the United States should pay the price. I mean, the bottom line is Israel's the nation implementing this policy, and the United States is the nation facilitating this policy. Let's be rest assured that Israel could not do what it's doing without the support of the United States. The international community is quite unified in demanding cessation of hostilities and the immediate implementation of a massive humanitarian assistance program for the Palestinians in Gaza, and then for a negotiated settlement that gives the Palestinian people what they have deserved for the past 75 plus years. That is a homeland of their own. Israel doesn't want this. This is the whole reason why this fighting is taking place. Hamas didn't act on October 7th in a vacuum. It was the manifestation of 75 years of Israeli occupation, Israeli colonial administration, apartheid governance, where the Palestinians literally had no hope for a better future. And Hamas's action shook free the rust that had corroded the peace process. And this is what Israel fears, especially Israel governed by Benjamin Netanyahu and his far right-wing coalition. They have said they don't want a Palestinian homeland. They want a greater Israel, a biblical Israel that has no Palestinian presence. Right. This is a fantasy devoid of reality, but Israel is willing to pursue this objective and kill as many Palestinians in the process.
Right, Vanessa, it's not only that they want Palestinian homeland, that's true, but in addition to that, they didn't want any Palestinians either. I mean, as human beings, remember all those, calling names, calling them animals and all that. And then we have some Palestinians who were just recently freed in this swap thing that happened recently, and they recount what they went through while in Israeli custody. They mostly complain about those humiliating, tortures that they suffered more than the physical ones. So I want to ask you where this kind of mentality and mindset emanate from. I mean, this feeling that some Israelis they feel superior to Palestinians.
Well, I mean, ever since the British, in reality, supported and incubated the Zionist colonialist settler project, this entity has been a death cult. If you look at what has happened since 1947, going into the Nakba, as Scott mentioned, this hasn't been going on for, since October the 7th. It's been going on actually since before 1948. There were already massacres being carried out against Palestinians in order to dispossess them of their land and their homes and their dignity way before 1947, when the UN carved up Palestine and gave more than 50% to the Zionist project before the before the UK basically pretty much handed it over to the US in later years to manage it. And so therefore what we see, I mean, we saw the recent pictures of civilians, children, women, that were basically taken out of refugee centers and places where they were taking shelter. They were stripped naked. And people have made, in my opinion, a very justified comparison to the Nazis in the way that the Zionists are treating Palestinians. It's complete humiliation. It's massacre of children. What is it now? Around 7,000 children. I mean, even saying that number is unimaginable. You know, we get almost inured to this creeping up of these numbers on a daily basis. We're flooded with images of children that have limbs missing, heads missing, that are burned, that are injured beyond belief, that have lost their entire family. And yet we see absolutely no compassion either from the Zionist regime or from its supporters. You know, when the UN representative from the US can literally veto peace, that is the depth to which we've descended right now. The US is basically vetoing peace. It's extraordinary.
Right. And Scott, Ukrainian President Zelensky is visiting the U.S. now, is in Washington, is there to beg for, of course, more money and weapons to fight Russia. Why shouldn't the U.S. treat the Palestinians by the same token?
Because we don't care about the Palestinians. The Palestinians don't add anything to the national security framework of the United States. We've look, from the moment we got involved in this Arab-Israeli peace process dating back to Henry Kissinger, the Palestinians were an inconvenient reality. You know, Richard Nixon, the president of the United States at the time, had encouraged Kissinger to seek a final solution, and that's a horrible term, I'll come up with a better one, a more lasting solution to the problem of Israeli Arab relations, and in particular Israel's relationship with the Palestinians. But Kissinger didn't do this. He chose to focus on Egypt and bettering relations between Egypt and Israel, and the Palestinians were left up to the Israelis to resolve. And that's been our posture ever since. We don't want to do anything that impedes our relationship with Israel. And the Palestinian people are such an impediment because Israel doesn't want a Palestinian state. And if we were to actually pursue a Palestinian state, it would put us at odds with your greatest regional ally. So this notion that the United States cares about the Palestinians, I am sickened to my stomach every time I hear the President of the United States, the Secretary of the United States, or any American official talk about how their heart is breaking for the Palestinian people. It is a lie. Because if their heart was breaking for the Palestinian people, they would do something for the Palestinian people, such as insist on a ceasefire. But we vetoed that at the United Nations.
Exactly. And Vanessa, the U.S. is still doing the same thing. It's constantly kept blocking all efforts at the UN Security Council, as you know, that aimed at stopping this carnage in Gaza. So if the Security Council is not the venue where countries could come up with these ideas to stop something like this Israeli savagery that's happening in Gaza, where should they be able to do this? Which international body?
Well, I think, also an important point to make, not only is the US vetoing peace, of course, it's supplying the bombs and the weapons that are being used to carry out the genocide against Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but also in West Bank, which is being largely ignored, of course. That's a quiet genocide and ethnic cleansing that's ongoing with US support, while the more overt massacre of Palestinians in Gaza is ongoing. I think really what we are seeing is a shift in the balance of power, of course, and that is what is sending the US and its policy instrument in the Middle East into a spin, which is, of course, the emergence of BRICS, the rise to power of Russia and China and their alliances in the region in particular. And I think, the only other organization that has any potential to broker any kind or mediate any kind of peace. And we've seen President Putin recently speaking to Netanyahu, visiting the UAE and Saudi Arabia, etc., speaking to Iran and even to Hamas officials. And I think until there is an alternative, I think that's really the only alternative that I can see that has any potential to broker any kind of agreement, and also to legitimize the Palestinian resistance. But of course, what the US is doing is totally delegitimizing the Palestinian resistance by nominating Hamas a terrorist organization, while in reality, Hamas is only one faction among the resistance movement. There's more than 17 factions in Gaza alone. And then, as I said before, Hamas is not in West Bank. There are multiple other resistance factions inside West Bank, and they're not even all Islamist. There are Christian factions that are against the Zionist oppression. There are even socialist communist factions like the PFLP that are against Zionist occupation, oppression, and apartheid. So, at least the BRICS organization or complex is legitimizing the resistance, which the West is simply not doing.
And of course, Netanyahu said that they're ready to start a war, on the West Bank. They have been actually at war, but they're even eager to expand it further. Now, Scott, Antonio Guterres just admitted that the United Nations is unable to do anything and to stop this bloodshed in Gaza. Yeah, we had Egypt and Mauritania yesterday. They were pushing to hold this General Assembly meeting at the United Nations. Now the Security Council's efforts have failed, thanks to the U.S., of course, the veto there. So what can the UN General Assembly meeting do? Because resolution that's been invoked, 377A, asks for collective efforts by a number of countries, but it's non-binding.
It's non-binding, but understand this: it is the only forum outside of the Security Council that can authorize the use of military force. And frankly speaking, this is what has to happen. I'm a promoter of peace. I believe in peace, but I'm not anti-war when a cause is just. And the cause of the Palestinian people is just. The Security Council, through this 377A resolution, can say that Israel must stop its genocide against the Palestinian people, that humanitarian aid must be brought in, and that if Israel opposes this, that the General Assembly authorizes military force to be used. Now, while this doesn't result in a Security Council Chapter 7 resolution, it provides all the legality necessary for any nation around Israel to use military force to achieve the goals and objectives of the United Nations. And so, there is something, and what this would represent is that the entire world has turned not only on Israel, but the United States, that the world is sick and tired of America stopping peace through its veto in the Security Council.
Vanessa, let's also have your take on this General Assembly meeting at the United Nations and what it could do in favor of Palestinians.
Yeah, I think, as Scott said, there is potential. I think what is quite shocking for me as well is that there is absolutely no mandate for sanctions on Israel, while we've seen for decades now, when the US has an agenda for regime change or destabilization or resource grab or occupation, illegal occupation of territories, particularly in the Middle East. Of course, I'm here in Syria, which is effectively occupied by the United States from the north to the south on the eastern border, right? The immediate reaction from the US and the UK alliance and the EU is to place sanctions on a target nation. And yet, despite the fact that there are multiple experts, including very early on UN experts that wrote a very strong report, basically calling what Israel is doing a genocide, a de facto genocide, we haven't seen any effort from the UN to pressure for sanctions on Israel. I'm not an expert on UN law, so I'm not quite sure how that would work. Maybe Scott could illuminate. But, you know, why has there been no calls for sanctions on Israel? That's a rhetorical question, largely, of course.
Yeah. Scott, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, again, normally such a call would be made through the Security Council. The way the charter was envisioned is that the Security Council would take its responsibilities seriously. But as we've seen in the case of Israel, the United States will veto anything and everything that seeks to hold Israel to account.
Right.
So now we have this extraordinary measure. And it is extraordinary because what we're basically asking the General Assembly to do is acknowledge the failure of the Security Council and to take matters in their own hands. And normally the General Assembly is not the body to do this. It would be split, generally speaking, along political lines that reflect the Security Council. But here we have a situation where the entire world recognizes the genocide that's taking place. And so now the General Assembly has the potential to pass a resolution that can sanction Israel. It's not binding, meaning it doesn't mean nations have to do this, but it provides the legitimate authority for nations to begin sanctioning Israel, and if the General Assembly wants, to use military force against Israel.
Right. Now, Vanessa, this is a piece of advice from the Israeli defense minister to Palestinian resistance fighters, exactly quoting his words: surrender unconditionally or die. Now, with such a mindset on the part of Israeli officials, you know, one of them saying, why did you nuke Gaza? What kind of war is this? Just nuke them and just kill them all. So what do you see on the horizon for Palestinians? Where is this, in which direction is this moving?
Well, I mean, I think militarily, I was actually discussing that here in Syria today, and it'd be interesting again to get Scott's opinion. But people here who are following the military situation obviously very closely, because Syria is one of the closest allies to Palestine and to Hezbollah in the northern occupied territories. The fact is that the IOF is losing the battle inside Gaza. It's basically burying itself in a quagmire. It's opened up various new entry points, both in the north and in the south. It's had to withdraw from various areas in the north today because of the intensity of the resistance attacks. Once they enter Gaza, of course, they're at the mercy of the resistance that can run rings around them. You know, these are not battle-hardened soldiers. They're used to bombing, using artillery. I mean, I've been in Gaza during the 2012 aggression. You're basically bombed from every single possible direction, from the sea, from the air, from the land, from helicopters, from drones. That's what they're used to. They're not used to on-the-ground fighting, right? And ultimately, the more soldiers that enter the territory, the harder then it is for Israel to basically bomb as they have been doing. The bombing will have to be a lot more discriminate and targeted. And the resistance then comes into its own, because it knows the territory, it's urban warfare, it knows the tunnels. We've already seen multiple times up close contact combat where the IOF have been basically wiped out. And the casualty figures, I think, will be a lot higher than the 5,000 injured that the Israeli media is putting out, and the number of dead. So I think militarily, you know, I think we've still got a lot to come from the resistance. They've intimated that. They've said that they've held back on their tactics and on their strategy, and that they're ready. And the thing is, we know from the fact that Hezbollah is maintaining this low-grade pressure in the north. Syria is opening up its territory for resistance factions to fire, for example, missiles at the occupied Golan territories. But they're all trying to contain that escalation that the US and Israel as its proxy is looking for. But ultimately, we know that Hezbollah or Nasrallah has already said they will enter the war more extensively when the Palestinian resistance tell them that they're struggling. But so far, they're not struggling.
Yeah, of course, let's not forget the Yemenis. They're also stopping ships destined for Israel. Hurting the Israeli economy bad. Now, Scott, I want to ask you about Washington's ultimate and, of course, covert agenda for Palestine. Would the U.S. come to terms with this reality that Palestinians want to have their own country, their own state. They want to have East Al Ghouta as their capital. They want to govern themselves?
Well, before the United States comes to grips with that, we have to come to the grips with what Israel is going to look like. Vanessa is 100% correct. Israel has lost this war. They can't win it. I mean, no matter what they do, they can't win it. The Israeli force is incapable of defeating Hamas in Gaza. The reason why they're asking for Hamas's surrender is because they're desperate to bring an end to this conflict, because they know that the resistance is prevailing. Not only that, if Hezbollah enters this conflict from the north, Israel will lose northern Israel. They can't defend it. The Israeli economy is collapsing. Tens of thousands of people have been withdrawn from the north. The economy is crippled by what the Houthi are doing. Israel is going to be different. Netanyahu's time in office is finished, and you know, the United States is going to have to come to grips with what Israel is, what Israel will be going forward, and then they can begin to craft a Palestinian solution. But for the United States, putting Palestine ahead of Israel is putting the cart before the horse. We have to get Israel reconfigured in a way that it will politically accept the potential of a Palestinian state.
Right. And Vanessa, one last question. The Iranian foreign minister told the Doha Forum yesterday that there is only one thing that Tehran and Tel Aviv agree on, and that the two-state solution won't work. Of course, Tehran says that there should be only one state. Iran's offering a referendum to be held by Palestinians, both expatriates and Palestinians inside occupied territory, so that they can decide on their own what their future should look like. Your opinion?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the two-state solution for me has been dead in the water for a long time. And the one-state manifesto is what pretty much all the united Palestinian resistance factions agree on, and the majority of the countries that have been supporting the Palestinian resistance. Because, of course, what Israel has done is to undermine any opportunity for a two-state solution. Why? Because since the 70s, under Ariel Sharon, they've basically been deliberately building the settlements to break up the West Bank into small partitioned cantons that can basically be separated and controlled. And that, of course, is what we're now seeing. They're destroying the bridges and the road structures and the connecting routes, while, of course, they're increasing the apartheid wall, and they're looking at encroaching on the Jordan Valley, etc. So Israel has no interest in a two-state solution. So for me, you know, in an ideal world, it has to be the dismantlement of the Zionist project, and it has to be a return, basically, to the 48 borders, with the state of Palestine and Jews and Christians and Palestinians living in peace as they did before Britain incubated the Zionist settler project.
All right, that's all the time we have for this show. Let me thank my guest, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector in Iraq from Bethlehem, New York, Vanessa Beeley, independent journalist in Damascus. And thank you for watching this episode of News Review. I've been your host, Behruz Najafi, and I'll see you next time.